Thank you so much, Darren, for taking the time to talk to me. It's really good. I know how busy you are. You are a man of many talents, it has
Oh,
to be
thanks.
said.
Well,
Well, it's true, isn't it? I mean, you you write these novels. You were a Green MP at one time.
yeah, Green Assembly member in London. Yes, yeah,
Green
yeah,
Assembly
yes.
member.
The
I
local
mean,
council as well for many years. Yeah, yeah.
which I great deal of respect for doing that. Anybody that fights for the cause of this planet that we live on deserves all the respect that's due. Uh,
Yes, well, I did that for quite. I mean, I did that full time for 16 years, and as a campaigner, sort of volunteer for many years before that. But as I was coming up to my 50th birthday, I thought, as actually I've done this sort of done all this sort of green campaigning for nearly 30 years. There's other things I want to do in life and be able to just spend a bit more
Absolutely.
time on my musical interests and stuff like that. So yeah, I took a back seat from the politics back in 2016, and one of the reasons was because I did want to sort of explore my musical passions more. So I've been working on a variety of different projects since then, doing some PR for various bands, and
That's
a lot
right.
of it's
Yeah.
a mixture of rock and folk stuff. I've been keeping my blog going since 2014 now, so coming up for nearly 10 years now. I've been doing that, doing gig reviews and interviews and album reviews and sort of different musical snippets and stuff like that. And then I mean, I'd written lots of things before throughout my life, whether it was about politics or about music or whatever. But during lockdown, then sort of got into actually writing my first book, which I've done three now. The Slade one's
Yeah.
come out. So my first one was on the Sweet.
Another great band. Another great band. And the other one is the legendary birthday girl from this week coming up, Susie Quattro.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So I did Sweet, I did Susie, and then the sort of obvious third one for the trilogy, really.
Is it gotta be?
Got to be Slade, and
Yeah.
Slade was actually my first sort of real love as a band. I remember them as a sort of really small kid, sort of 6, 7 in the 70s, and they were sort of background to my childhood. Then, but I didn't properly get into them really fully until I was a young teenager in the early 80s. And I was 14. Slade started having a revival after the Reading Festival in 1980. I
That's
saw them on
yeah.
Pops in January 1981, and was hooked then on. So yeah, I was a sort of second generation of Slade fans, as it were, who came along during the 80s, and I saw them live at Donington Monsters of Rock in 1981 with
Mm.
that was with AC/DC and Whitesnake, and another. That was actually my first ever gig as well. So that was my
Oh
first gig.
wow!
Slade,
Talk about trial
AC/DC,
by
Whitesnake.
fire. Would I mean you mentioned that, but what other bands were you into, sort of back then? What because it sounds to me as if it was very much the glam rock
Yeah,
thing
I mean,
that appealed.
yeah, which almost was a bit of an accident, really, because I was liking AC/DC, which we've mentioned, and
Mm,
Whitesnake and Rainbow, and my dad was really into all these bands as well. So my parents were quite young when they had me, so they were never sort of like fuddy-duddy, sort of straight
yeah.
laced sort of parents. They were always sort of like rockers at heart. So I'd listen, I'd grown up with this type of music, with my dad always sort of belting it out the stereo all the time, but really started to get into a lot of those hard rock bands in the early 80s, when I was like 14 at or so. But then when I discovered, sort of rediscovered Slade when they had their comeback, and then that led me then to sort of like look back on their sort of hunt down some of their albums secondhand, and I found out more about them. And I was going to secondhand record shop in Preston where I was brought up, and then inevitably sort of then started buying albums from the Sweet and Mott the Hoople and Susie Quattro and T-Rex and so on. So I sort of discovered, but really as the 80s progressed, I got sort of less into current rock music by the mid 80s, but everyone was like overusing synthesizers. Albums sounded very overproduced and so on, which wasn't working for me. So that was not really. So and the sort of 80s pop charts didn't really interest me either. So on sort of both counts, I sort of was losing touch with what was going on in current music, and just spending my time sort of delving in secondhand albums, and just discover this sort of vast and it's like a journey. You find one band, you discover one band, and you find out that so and so
you do. So it's like a rabbit hole, isn't it?
It was a journey, and I've never. There's no bands that I used to love. Think, oh no, I don't. I'm not into those. I'm too embarrassed to admit I like those. I've discovered lots of new genres of music and lots of new bands and different bands and new discoveries and so on along the way. But I've never given up on anyone. So all those bands that I was really passionate about as a 14-year-old, I still play now. So I still
good to hear.
My Slade and my Sweet and my Susie Quattro. I still like AC/DC and Whitesnake and Rainbow, and I like lots of other bands as well. But initial ones that I really got into as a 14-year-old haven't left me, and I'm still a massive fan.
I don't think it does it? I think the stuff that you were passionate about as a teen, it never goes, does it?
Yeah, well, I think those are your sort of real formative years in terms of your musical passions and what really switches you on to music and so on. I mean, people are sometimes a bit surprised because I was discovering all these archetypal 70s bands, whether they're more album oriented bands, like Humble Pie or whatever, or whether they're more singles oriented bands like Sweet and Slade and so on. But I was discovering all these 70s bands in the 80s, so that sometimes throws people a bit because I'm sort of a few years younger than say the more typical fan of the music of that area. But I just think great music is great music, and it was the 70s was such an incredible time for music, because not only did you have some amazing albums from the more album orientated bands, and you had Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin and Sabbath and all those type of bands and putting out really sort of iconic albums of the era, era defining album. But not only were the album charts brilliant, you looked at the single charts and what was deemed pop, it was just amazing as well. So as well as all the sort of hard rock bands in the album charts at the more sort of serious end, you had some brilliant bands in the singles charts as well.
It was a great time for music. It really was.
And Susie and T-Rex and so on. I mean, Slade, of course, unlike some of the glam acts, I mean, they did triumph in both charts, because they consistently get number one, so 6 number ones in the UK, but also we're selling serious numbers of albums, and had some top selling albums as well. So not all of the glam era bands managed to have a foot in both camps, but Slade shifted the singles and they shifted the albums.
And there's plenty of subject matter there to write a book about as well. Is that why you chose Slade this time? Because there was so
Yeah,
much.
I mean that's that, and you know, as I say, it's one of the first bands I got really passionate about. They've been, you know, sort of my main love for a long time musically. So it was nice to write about them. So the book, it's part of a series for a publisher called Sonic Bond. The series is Decades, and they look at the books look at an artist over a key decade of their career. Obviously, with my books, it's been the 70s. So it examines every album and single that's been released during that period. Looks at the live shows as well. Looks at some of the other challenges they would have at times, and especially, you know, with Slade, that certainly happened with
Oh yeah,
they
yeah.
were flavor of the month from, you know, and having major hits from 71 through to 75. After that, and they were spending more and more time in America. You know, the hits had started to dry up, and they had some really quite lean years. They were still producing some great music,
Yeah.
had some quite lean years during the later part of the decade. But then at the dawn of the 80s, had a massive change in fortunes. Ozzy Osbourne was due to be playing the Reading Festival in summer 1980. The band didn't feel they were prepared enough, and they cancelled at the 11th hour. And Slade's manager, Chaz Chandler, got a call saying if Slade were interested in filling the slot. Three of them were up for it straight away. Dave Hill took some more convincing, but eventually, I mean, Dave Hill was worried that, you know, that they'd be getting booed off in front of a massive crowd, and, you know, they thought that, you know, the band, they tried their best, and they'd had the hits, but wouldn't be able to sort of get the crowds. But the rest, anyway, they were convinced. They were convinced to do it. Dave was convinced to do it in the end. And as soon as they came on, it was just an absolute triumph, and the crowd. Yeah. And that the recording from that concert is available on CDs. There was a box set came out recently of Slade live recordings, which includes most of the Reading set, and that is well worth listening to. And
Absolutely. And girls and boys out there, get this, check it out, because you think you know Slade. Slade Live is a
Slade Live is fantastic. And then a year later, and this wasn't, you know, sort of last minute invitation, they got properly sort of promoted and advertised and so on. A year later, they were then booked to do the Monsters of Rock Festival at Donington in 1981. That's the first time I saw them, and huge crowd again. Completely, you know, completely had the crowd in the palm of their hands, and yeah, they then had, you know, on the back of that, attracted fans from the sort of growing, you know, sort of heavy metal was having a renaissance at that time. There'd been the new wave of heavy metal started up in the 1970s. Lots of new bands after, you know, hard rock, heavy metal had been in the doldrums a bit in the late 70s, and then you know, lots of new energy coming along in 79. I mean, Slade never tried to pass themselves off as a heavy metal band, but they did appeal to that, you know, they did appeal to that crowd, and they did get themselves a younger audience, you know, of young fans who have perhaps not been around for the you know, for the early hits the previous decade, but we're now around and seeing Slade live, and you know, buying the albums and the newer singles and so on. So they did very much have a sort of second wind as a band after, you know, after some really lean years in the late 1970s. So it is, you know, it is fascinating to sort of see how they deal with that. I mean, I obviously knew all this, but one of the things that really struck me when I was doing research for the book, and I spent time in the British Library looking at archives of old music magazines from the era, sort of Sounds and NME and so on. But I mean, I knew they were getting sort of largely ignored by the music press, but some of the reviews they were getting at the time, there's so much snobbishness about Slade before they come back. And one reviewer in Sounds is saying, if I wrote songs as bad as this, I'd have to commit suicide. And he's talking about the big hits, these number one hits of We're All Crazy Now, and so on. So just really sort of brutal snobbish treatment. But then once they'd then done the Reading Festival in 1980, they music press were all over them again, and they were they were back in back in fashion again, and flavour of the month once more. So it was sort of really fascinating doing that research and charting the sort of challenges for the.
Yeah, I can see you're very enthusiastic about it. And do you think part of that kind of snobbery was, I mean, I'm from Wolverhampton as well, so you can probably tell from the accent, and it's like, oh, young Brummie, and it's like, well, nothing good ever comes out of our area. And when you look at the bands that have come out of Birmingham, the Black Country, and the Midlands, it's staggering how many bands came from the area, and yet there was this, but they're not from London,
Yeah, I mean, they weren't from London, but lots of bands aren't from London, but but then do sort of move down to London, and seen at the right places, and
that's it.
Or so visit. But Slade were just Slade. They never tried to be cool and sophisticated and be something that they weren't. They were, I think, they were very much two sort of two ends of glam. There was the more sort of art school sort of end of glam rock with Roxy Music and Bowie and so on, and then there was the very raucous, far more working class sort of raunchier end that was completely epitomised by Slade. And Slade were just absolutely themselves, and so there was definite snobbery about that. Even when they were having hits, there was a degree of
they were still being battered by the press.
I mean, Jim Lee, when I spoke to Jim Lee, I mean, he did feel that they kept up the wacky image in terms of the outrageous sort of clothes for too long, and he felt with hindsight they should have knocked that on the head sooner, because he was concerned about that. But I'm not sure if you'd have constrained Dave Hill. Certainly
he has quite a personality.
To look more sober. I mean, sober fashion and Dave Hill are two things that just don't get together, really. So but yeah, that was one of the things that Jim Lee said, is that he felt they kept the wacky image up for far too long. But now, I mean, I think there is more appreciation of the music, beyond the fashions, whatever they were wearing. It's all a very long time ago, but but the music definitely stands up, and I think there is now more an appreciation of the music, and this book is a celebration about that. It's very much celebrating the music of Slade. It looks at every album track by track, every single that they did, and it's very much a celebration of the band, and in particular a focus on the music.
Did you get much input from the boys?
Well, I interviewed before I started on the book. I'd interviewed Jim Lee, so I was able to draw on that quite a bit. And I interviewed Don Powell more recently, which was which was really good as well. So, but as well as those two face-to-face interviews that I did, I also was able to go back into, as I say, lots of the old music archives and so on, which has been great. Some of those online, others I was sort of hunting around in the British Library for, and digging out nuggets from each year. the 70s then. And yeah, so that was really useful as well. And of course, 3 of the 4 of them have each written their own autobiography as well, and with their own take on. So yeah, that was all useful background reading as well. I did do an incredible amount of research and had files and files of stuff as I was putting it all together. But yeah, it was an enjoyable process, and I'm pleased to be able to celebrate the band in this way.
I think you do have to check all the sources with Slade, because all 4 have very different opinions of what Slade was and what the work should have been, and where they were going, and they were all very different.
Yeah, and sometimes people's memories about what year something was or whatever can be slightly different and so on. So it is, yeah, it is always good to.
And none of us are getting any younger.
No, and quite, and for the best of reasons, sometimes people's memories. Get a little clouded about when exactly things happened or whatever. So yeah, it was good to check across a variety of different sources. And as I say, because it looks at each year of the decade, I do spend quite a bit of time sort of quoting from various interviews at the time. So it's not like trying back what was happening 50 years ago. It's actually it's actually what they were saying and
which
doing at the time.
I think it's better sometimes, because you get the zeitgeist.
It's nice to have some sort of more reflective look backs from from later on, but it was also nice to be able to get the what they were saying at the time, what people were saying about the band at the time, and so on. So yeah, it was definitely nice to use some of that.
Absolutely. Have you ever seen the film? I bet you have, Slade in Flame.
Yes, yeah, and I do talk about this quite a bit in the book. Yeah.
I find the ending really frustrating. It's almost as if they're taking you on this journey, and the train's full steam ahead, and you're with the band, and it's like it's all going great. You can see the cracks, but it's all going great. And then it's like a guillotine, isn't it? That kind of comes down, and it's like, and then it was done.
And it implodes spectacularly.
Yeah, but that's what happened to them. It literally just
in Brighton. It's all falling apart. And at the time, the band had to spend a bit of time explaining to fans that that they weren't splitting up. That this was a film. It was based on some of their experiences, based on experiences of other bands that they knew. In that era, and some of their experiences, but it was a fictional band, and they did have to explain sometimes.
At the time when that came out, that must have been what fans thought.
Yeah, and it was very unexpected for Slade. I think people were expecting far more of a happy-go-lucky sort of hard day's night sort of sort of lighter film with more sort of comedy elements and so on. This is not a light film. It's a very sort of dark and gritty look at the music industry and the way bands were treated and so on, and some of the sort of dark figures on the the edge of the music industry and so on. So yeah, so it's not a light comedy film, but I think it has stood the test of time, and it is.
It has,
and it does get highly praised now as as one of the films of that genre. So I think it stands up well, and the songs of course are great, and two of Slade's greatest songs written for that film, Far Far Away and How Does It Feel. So yes, I think it probably wasn't what people were expecting, and it probably caused a few surprises amongst fans, but looking back now, it definitely stands up.
I think it was very brave of them as well, sort of exposing, if you like, the darker side of the music industry, which everybody knows exists, but I don't think people did back then. It was all very, men in boardrooms smoking cigars, making all
Yeah.
these decisions, and the kids went to the shows, they bought the records, and everything was great. And I don't think anybody knew or even gave it any thought to what it was like to be in a band.
Yeah, and it shows sort of various aspects of the music industry. You've got the the small time sleazy crooked agent in their early days, and the manager, and then they get signed up to a label, and they're being manipulated, and
The lovies come
so on,
along.
and sort of
Yeah.
marketed like a packet of fish fingers or whatever. So both sides of how bands can be manipulated both before they made it and after they've broken through. There's no there's no escape. certainly at that period anyway.
Absolutely. I'm going to put you on the spot now. I'm going to ask you what your all-time favorite Slade song is.
My full-time favorite Slade song, I mean, I think I'm going to have to be very predictable and just say, "Come on, feel the noise." I know it's a pretty obvious one, but it's sorry.
That's fine.
Just another call come through.
I won't keep you.
Right, that's gone. Sorry about that.
That's
Sorry,
fine.
do you want to ask me that again?
Yeah. Mama, we're all crazy now. Your all-time favorite Slade.
Oh no, I said, "Come on, feel the noise."
Sorry,
yeah,
I'm telling you mine.
my all-time favorite. I mean, I think it really is the Slade manifesto. These sort of the about the art of having a good time, about the enjoy the intensity of a live performance, and so on. And I think it's just an absolutely brilliant song. I mean, it's not the only side to Slade. There are far more far mellower sides to Slade, which people don't always immediately think of. But I'm going to go for "Come On, Feel the Noise." I mean, it's
a damn fine choice,
and it's 50 years old this year, and
it is, yeah.
Celebrate.
You mentioned your PR work as well. How I mean, you've been PR for some massive names. I mean, Bernie told me Thunderstick, who we know well. These are big names, and they really are, again, from that all-time classic era of rock and early metal. I mean, it must be fantastic working with these kind of people.
Oh yeah, I mean, sadly, obviously, Bernie is no longer with us. He was he was actually the first that I did some work for. He asked me to. I met up with him and sort of told him about my sort of move from politics into doing more music wise, and he sort of gave me that chance, and I did worked on an album launch for him and tour, and scooped up lots of publicity. It was really great to work with him. That then opened up other doors once I'd worked with Bernie Tommy. But I mean, doing PR and publicity and so on was nothing new to me. I mean, I'd spent years and years this in politics and in campaigns for various charities and so on. So it was all second nature to me. It was just turning it into onto a different subject. But yeah, and then I've worked with a number of up and coming artists as well, but more recently did PR for the Lust for Life tour, which was Glenn Matlock and Clem Burke and Katie Puckrick, who you may remember from the Word in the 90s, but is a brilliant singer. So they did a tour celebrating Iggy Pop's "Lust for Life" album, which I worked on, doing the PR for that, and now we've just announced a new tour by the same band for next year as well. So
Fantastic.
keeping busy with that. So yeah, sort of mixture of my PR work and my books and my reviews and so on.
You don't have a lot of spare time.
Keeping me busy, but it's doing something that as I say, I've always loved since being a teenager, and using skills that I've picked up along the way in other areas anyway. So it's all sort of come together, really.
Have you ever been tempted to pick up an instrument?
Oh, I'm completely clueless on anything like that. I'm not musical. I'm not musical at all. I'm actually quite badly coordinated, sort of hand-to-eye coordination. So I think I'd be pretty hopeless anyway. But I think my skill is is definitely more as an audience member rather than a player. But hopefully I can capture some of that, through my writing. And enthusiasm, I can capture some of that sense of sort of experience of being in the audience and seeing a band and having that experience. But yeah, I'm definitely more suited to writing about them than doing it myself.
What else do you like to do? What you like to do in your spare time?
Spare time, I live down in Hastings now, so walks along the seafront and so on. Always like spending a lot of time on the coast. Do a bit of cycling as well, a bit of camping, lots of reading. So a mixture. I mean, I do still read the odd sort of political thing, but also lots of rock biographies and I've just bought a book on the history of the national music scene this week, so I'm going to be
delving into that,
sitting in the sun and looking at that at some point.
Any thoughts on which band you'd like to cover next?
I'm not sure. I've not made any definite decision yet. I thought what I'd like to do is actually get this book out, sort of sort of properly see this one through and published and so on, and have a little bit of a break and some thinking time before I turn my thoughts to the next one, because I ended up doing 3 in 3 years, and it was it was
a lot of work.
Very enjoyable, but it was all quite intense. I thought, right, when the Slade one is done, and it's like, you've got a bit of a glam trilogy there with Sweet Susie and Slade. When the Slade one is done, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from it, and then see what
maybe T-Rex, Mark Bolan.
Well, in that series with the same publisher, someone has actually done T-Rex, but there are others. But as I say, I also like lots of other genres of music as well. I don't just like glam rock. I follow heavy metal. I like folk rock. I like sort of country. Lots of different genres of.
So you never know what book's going to come out there next.
It could be anything.
Well, I'm not going to keep in because I'm very aware that you had a phone call, Darren. So all I'm going to say is thank you ever so much for your time, and it's fantastic talking to you. Do please keep in touch.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thanks for taking the trouble. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care of yourself.
Bye.
Bye.